Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome in the name of IGCC Sustain Markets to this session breaking down the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. My name is Johannes, and I'll be moderator for today. As you know, the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act is set to be enforced from January next year for companies with having over 3,000 employees, and will be also applicable for companies with a smaller size, having 1,000 employees in 24. As most of you already know, there will be a mandatory compliance on human rights due diligence for all the companies headquartered in Germany, as well as potentially affects also German company subsidiaries and suppliers in India, as well as Indian companies having business concerns in India. To support the Indo-German business communities, the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce will be delivering this session. We want to provide our members with practical knowledge about this topic and also offer some solutions for capacity building opportunities to ultimately prepare your company for the incoming regulations on supply chain due diligence. Let me also say that this event is conducted in very close partnership with Amphori, the support of the German embassy to India. And it's conducted also within the framework of an overarching project, which is named Growing with Responsibility, and all is implemented by IGCC Sustain Markets in cooperation with the Business Scout for Development program, which is commissioned by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Today's agenda is very nice. We are very looking forward. We will have, first of all, some welcome remarks, which will be given by representatives of the project implementers, IGCC and also Amphori. And we will also have a representative from the German embassy in India present to address the audience. I'm also very, very happy that we have lined up great speakers today for you. One from the industry and also a very known expert in the field on human rights due diligence, which will be introduced later on also. I want to highlight before we start, please, if you have questions, feel free to use the question box, which you can find in your dashboard. It's usually in the default setting on the right. Please write down your questions there. We will collect them, and please also try to name the person you're addressing the question to, so it's easier for us to organize it. So without further ado, let's start. I would ask now Mr. Stefan Halusa, the Director General of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, to address the audience with his welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome, obviously, to all the participants of today's webinar kickoff event on the topic of growing with responsibility. We are very happy to be able to have this webinar today with such a great lineup. First and foremost, I would like to also welcome our partners for this program and for the event today. From Amphori and from the German Embassy, we're very happy to team up with you to make to implement this very important project. I guess we are all aware that, or we are trying to make everyone aware of the importance and the impacts of the supply chain law, of the German supply chain law, also to the industry and the companies in India. As the EU has already announced their directive on supply chains, I think this will be an increasing importance for every company that wants to continue delivering services or products, goods into the European Union. And I think this topic of making the industry aware is the most important part at this moment in time. As Johannes said, it will law will take effect 1st of January 2023, which is only a few months away. And we want to help our companies, we want to help the members to prepare for it so that the regulations can be fulfilled, but at the same time minimize the efforts of doing so. And this we want to do with our partners that I already mentioned. And we are very happy, and I want to keep it short, as I said. I'm very happy to have two experts on these fields with us today, with Markus Löning, obviously, and with Anurag Garg, because it's all about practical know-how that we want to build up, and this is the most important. I think the aspect of sharing experience and helping the companies to prepare for the act on the basis of the knowledge that has been shared. It's our series of events. This is the kickoff of today, and we're very much looking forward to the collaboration on the program and to many more meetings on the subject of the supply chain law and the due diligence. With that, I would like to give back to Johannes or hand over to Linda directly. I'm not exactly sure how it's best done. So I wish everyone a very informative and interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Johannes, can I start? Do you want to? Okay, thank you very much. And it's great being here with you, although it's virtual. I think that's the reality of today's world. And I think it's a great initiative. And I think also this initiative shows that collaboration is the way forward in the rest of the challenges that we have, whether that's locally, regionally, or even globally. And we are really pleased to partner with the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce to deliver, say, this hybrid training in the series, which is focused on the automotive supply chain. And this is all about supply chain. And Stefan already mentioned it within his introduction. A lot of expectations are there already, and they are growing. And they are not only growing because we had already soft laws in place, like the UN Guiding Principles of Business Human Rights, but because those soft laws are now turning into hard law. And one of the examples is the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, or Lieferkettengesetz in nice German. Before I dive a bit deeper, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Linda. I am the president of Amfori, and I joined Amfori 1st of January of this year. And it's a great organization to work with, especially because it's all about collaboration and really making sure that the supply chain and managing that in a responsible manner is done collectively and collaboratively. What is Amfori about? We have member organizations, companies who join us because we help them in their due diligence journey on socially as well as environmentally. We do that by delivering tools and services, and those also include, for example, offering solutions for grievance handling, which we currently are testing in Vietnam. Our membership is around 2,500 members, and they predominantly still come from Europe, but the world is changing also from that perspective. And in India, we have currently around 2,500 suppliers to our members where we collaborate with, and we do that directly via our network representative. As already said, the German human rights due diligence law, that is the one which is really the topic for today. And what is going to be brought to you is, really hoping some practical exchange experience how to deal with that, because it's not going to be easy, and everyone needs to step up. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. Ultimately, everyone has to step up to meet the expectations in legislation or to meet the expectations from stakeholders. So I would encourage everyone here on this call to use this as a business opportunity to make sure that you're in business for the short as well as the long term, and that can only be done if you fulfill those obligations and make sure that you meet the expectations from your stakeholders there. Legislation is what we're talking about. How do you implement that in practice? What processes, policies are expected to do? How do you start? How do you prioritize? That's all what you are expected to do to embark on this journey to really step up to due diligence. Legislation already said it. It's a global perspective. There's local legislation, national ones, which has an implication outside of that national jurisdiction, but there is also country legislation and also national action plans as part of the guiding principles are being developed. And that also includes India, where there is thinking about this national action plan, which also will tie together with, say, all these expectations to grow. I would say wishing you a great webinar, wishing you great interaction. Hopefully you will learn from it, but also see this as an opportunity moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Johannes, you want to say something?
No, actually, I would also have, Linda, thank you very much. I would also have introduced you a little bit. However, my technical background was a bit lacking here. So that's why let me just say thank you to Linda, thank you to Stefan, and also welcome Tim. Just one little sentence about Tim. I'm very happy that he's here. He's representing the German embassy, and he's one of the people from the first hour who helped to push this topic in India, but he will say a few sentences, I guess, about this anyways. So Tim, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, Stefan. And I'm very glad to be here. Namaste for all my Indian friends. And being here 3.5 years in India, I'm very proud that the steps we have been going here into the direction of the obligations to fulfill the UN Guiding Principles are very impressive. And I'm glad I was a little part of it. But in the end, our Indo-German Network for Business and Human Rights has strong partners as the IGCC and Amphori and others, like the GTIE, the GIZ, and other NGOs. We were able to organize a lot of good things like the roundtables, facilitating network between different stakeholders and so on. So the network is alive, and that's good. And it was set up in 2018 as one of the support networks of the German National Action Plan. And now out of the German National Action Plan, this Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, as a German expression, is now, these networks are in all our embassies worldwide now, where German businesses are in place. And we was the first project here in India, and I think to provide advice, information, and orientation services to German companies in India and worldwide, and exchange with the Indian government about implementing a national action plan. Linda already mentioned it. It's a good thing, and our next Indo-German consultations between the governments, and I'm representing here the German government, is taking place in the 2nd of May, and we are looking forward to exchange on this topic also. What have we done so far here from the embassy? We set up a like-minded circle with several embassies on the political side and the economical side to address more in a common way to the Indian government and find ways to promote these ideas and promote more practical action. And then we have some projects in the field of occupational safety and health. About one is an award to apply for Indian companies to fulfill their obligations on the national side, but also on the international side. And therefore, we had a human rights project now going to the construction side and showing the workers what is needful in terms of occupational safety and health, and look a little bit around in the construction just to get more information how these labor work is working here in India. The main focus 2022 is, and we are here all in it, to do this roundtables and the trainings and do it practical and go a step forward. The German government is fully committed to enhancing human rights protection in the business context. This priority is an essential part of our value-orientated foreign policy. The content of the German due diligence law is based on the UN Guiding Principles, we already said it, which serve to protect internationally recognized human rights in business. This is very important. And let me say this clearly, the law is therefore not to be understood as a protectionist measure, but it's a consistent implementation of an international standard that should apply worldwide. And therefore, the federal government is also committed to the establishment of European and international minimum standards for corporate due diligence to ensure, and this is very important, to a level playing field. And I think we are all on the way, and hopefully in some years we will reach it. The EU Commission has shortly presented a corresponding legislative proposal. Against this background, the early cooperation with German companies for shared responsibility is also a good preparation for this European-wide regulation. German businesses can boast a long-standing tradition for sustainability in their business relation, and both environmental concerns and social standards as embodied in Germany's robust social partnership are part of our quality brand. The law underscores the firm commitment of the German government and business sector to be leading partners in fair and sustainable globalization. It extends the quality label, made in Germany, and here in India, made with Germany in global business operations. So I'm very glad. I'm looking forward to all the actions going around, and thank you, especially IGCC again, to organize it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for addressing the audience and for making a lot of valid points. Thank you, Linda. The same. Thank you, Stefan, also for your welcoming remarks. And I guess I'm very glad and happy that you actually addressed already all the very important points. The keywords here are step up the game, standard international, based on global guidelines, and many more things. And I'm looking forward now personally to hear something from our two experts that we have invited for this session. We will start today with Mr. Markus Löning. He's the Managing Director and Senior Strategy Advisor in his own company. He's also the founder, Learning Human Rights and Responsible Business. He is also the former Human Rights Commissioner of the Federal Republic of Germany from 2010 to 2013. In 2014, he founded his own think tank to help companies meet their human rights obligation. He works with a lot of board members and CEOs on the highest level of companies, and in the international context also in more than 70 countries, always focusing on human rights issues, giving his political background. Also, he is an expert in strategic communication with various kinds of stakeholders, advises boards of organizations on this issue. And we are so glad to have him here, and he will deliver his insights on business and human rights and its implications for trade. Please, Mr. Löning, the floor is yours.
Jonas, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and Stefan and Mr. Gosch, thank you very much for having me, for inviting me. Why am I an expert on business and human rights? Basically, it's what my team and I have been doing for the last 8 years. We've been helping companies establish human rights due diligence throughout their management systems, throughout their business processes. That was with companies in Europe and outside of Europe, across the globe, as we are living in a globalized economy. The topic of today, sometimes when I talk to people, they ask me, when is that going to go away? But I must tell you, it's not going to go away. The responsibility of business to respect human rights is something that is enshrined in the UN Guiding Principles. So it's a global principle. And you can see that India, with setting up a national action plan to implement the UN Guiding Principles, that it is a global principle that we're following. Germany is now enacting a law which will put the UN Guiding Principles in a law. And a couple of years from now, maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, the EU is also going to implement a law that is going to cover all of the EU single market with the same standards. And it's always the same thing that's required. Required is that companies look at their own operations, at their supply chains, and make sure that as far as they can, as far as their influence is there, human rights are being respected. So most of it obviously is business related. Most of it is around labor rights, around people working in supply chains. Not all of it, there are some extra topics, and I'll come back to that a little later. But basically, it is about labor rights in supply chains and in own operations, both for the companies in Europe, but also for suppliers in other countries that are in the middle of a supply chain. So if you're a supplier in the middle of the supply chain, you basically have to work in three directions. First of all, and that's the most important thing you need to do, is to keep your own house in order, which means that you need to make sure that in your own operations, whether it's the administration or whether it's the shop floor of production, that you make sure that human rights, which means labor rights in most cases, are respected, so that your house is in order and your house is clean. That's the most important task. Second task is that you need to know who your suppliers are and whether they do also respect human rights to the extent possible, and also to the extent you have visibility into your suppliers. So that's the second task that you need to follow. And the third task is that you need to report or convince your corporate clients that you do all of that, that your house is in order, that you know the risks that your suppliers may have, and that you know that your suppliers are also managing human rights risk and making sure that they are in line with labor law. So a lot of the convincing, the third point, will be done through certification or through audits or through other means, but it can also be done through reporting, through direct visits of a business partner. So there are different ways of convincing your customers that you are in line with these demands. So what does that mean in practice, and what does the German supply chain law actually require companies to do? So the key requirement of the German supply chain law, and that will be the same in the upcoming EU law, is that companies need to set up a human rights risk management system. This human rights risk management system follows what the OECD guidance is telling people to do, telling companies to do. And it contains basically 6 steps, and it is a global standard. And the 6 steps are that there must be a commitment by the management to respect human rights, and also a commitment by the management to describe the way it is managing its human rights risk. The second important bit is that you need to identify risks. Obviously, if you want to reduce risks or make sure you mitigate risks, you need to know them. So identifying risk is very important. The third point is that you need to have measures in place that will mitigate these risks once you have identified them. The fourth point is that you need to monitor what you're doing. So it's great if you know your risks and you have measures in place, but you should also be aware whether they are working, whether they do actually mitigate risks. The fifth point that OECD says that you should have is reporting. So transparency is extremely important in this, and transparency is also, and reporting is also the point that you, as a company that is part of a supply chain, needs to convince corporate customers that you are in line and that you are doing everything to mitigate human rights risk. And the last point, the sixth point that OECD demands, and that also the laws demand, is that grievance mechanisms be in place. And these grievance mechanisms should be open to your own employees, to the people working in your factories, in your administration, but they should also be open to suppliers, meaning that if a European company has a grievance mechanism in place, your customer has that grievance mechanism in place, your employees will also be able to reach your customer through this grievance mechanism. A lot of that will be done in supplier contracting. And what are the topics that need to be covered, and what are the topics that the German supply chain law is actually covering? So what are the human rights that we are talking about? The first point is child labor. It's very obvious that the human rights that we're talking about in this context basically are based in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but more even are described in the International Labour Organization's core labor standards. These are labor standards that are accepted worldwide. It's a global organization. This is a global standard that has been, and these standards have been ratified by most countries worldwide. So no child labor is the first point that needs to be addressed in your due diligence process, in your risk identification. Secondly, forced labor or slave labor. That is also something that needs to be addressed. And there are different definitions of what that can be and what kind of form this can take. It's not as simple as it sometimes sounds. Same goes for child labor. So you need to be aware of the definition on when something is considered child labor and when it is not considered child labor. So child labor, forced labor are the first 2 points. The third issue that the German law is addressing is occupational health and safety. You've just heard about that already. The fourth point addressed is freedom of association, which means that forming a union must be possible for workers. That is a right which is enshrined as well in the ILO core labor norms, as well as in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Unequal treatment is point number 5 on the list, which covers all sorts of discrimination or all sorts of discrimination in the working process, but also, for example, when employing people, unequal treatment can be part of the process. Adequate living wage, so paying a decent wage, is point number 6 in the demands of the German law. Companies must look at their environmental impacts, which could impact on people's health and safety in communities around factories, for example. So environmental impacts your company may have can impact the rights of people outside of your own company, outside of the people that are working, you also inside the factory, obviously, but that is the next point that needs to be addressed in this human rights due diligence. Land rights. So if you are building a factory, you need to respect the law regarding land rights. That is not something which happens on a day-to-day basis, but erecting a new factory, for example, will need to take into a process, a lawful process regarding the land rights. Security forces are very often a source of infringements on people's rights. So security forces and human rights compliant behavior of security forces is the next point on the list of the German law. And then there are 3 more environmentally related topics part of the law. One is the way you are treating, if you are working with mercury, there is a special provision for that. If you are working with persistent organic pollutants, that's also a point that needs to be covered in your human rights due diligence. And hazardous waste, obviously, also is part of that. All of these points, especially the environmental points, are always looked at under the angle of the potential human rights risk they may pose. So it is the human rights lens that is interesting under this law, and that's the way that you as a company should also look at that. So what do you do? How do you work with this, and how do you start addressing these topics? The first step is that, as I was saying, the board should be aware that they need to have a statement and a guidance document. The German law calls it a policy document where the board clearly says that it is committed to protecting human rights, to respecting human rights in its own operations and its business relations. And it should describe how this is done. So what is the kind of risk identification, but also what's the governance, what's the internal governance you are applying to your own operations to make sure responsibilities are clear and to make sure that reporting lines are clear, necessary resources are there to make sure that the human rights topics I've just mentioned are really covered and are assessed and managed so that they can be mitigated. So the first step is to make a policy statement outlining this and also describing your governance of the topic, the internal governance. The second topic that is the most important topic, which is because it is the core of each human rights risk management system, is risk identification and risk management. So the question there is, do you know your risks? Do you know your internal risks? And do you know the risks that may be in your supply chains? So that's the first step, is identify the risks that you may have, and you can use the list from the German law to go through that list and start mapping the rights holders who could be impacted by the work that you're doing in one of the topics that I've mentioned just before. So what are rights holders that could potentially be impacted? Usually it is, of course, in the first place, it's your own employees, workers working for you, but it could also be, as I was saying, with the example of environmental topics, it could also be community around the factory or one of your factories. So describing the risks, finding out the risks that you have and finding out who could potentially be impacted. And then the obvious next step is to start setting up a management system which will continuously look at those risks and also have a system of consequences in place that will help you manage these risks. So what do you do once you have identified the risk? And obviously, there are lots of different measures that can take place, because it will make a difference whether you have identified a problem inside your own operations, say in a factory where there's a problem with occupational health and safety, something needs to be done, or with fire safety or other topics, or with wages or overtime. So once you have identified these risks, mitigation of these risks must take place, and that will obviously be different if it's an internal risk that you have identified or whether it's a risk that you have in your upstream supply chain somewhere. Then once you have done all of these things, it's not a one-time exercise. It's not you sit down on Wednesday, identify the risks on Thursday, and on Friday it's all done. It's a continuous process. You need to set up a management system which will constantly look at questions whether what are your risks, are new risks coming up with new suppliers, could there something be coming up which we weren't aware of before, with new people working for you, and so on and so on. So you need to constantly monitor the risks, and you need to constantly also adapt your management system if new risks are coming up. Second, or the other thing you need to do, is talk to your suppliers. So first of all, you should make your suppliers aware of the situation and tell them, say, I want to be competitive on the European market. I have clients in the EU, Germany, or other European countries, and they have these requirements. They have legal requirements which they need to comply with, which means I need to comply with them. And it also means that you, as my supplier, needs to comply with these demands. So you should, as a first step, develop a code of conduct, which could then be part of your contractual relation with suppliers, which contains all of these points I've been mentioning before, obliging your supplier to also assess their own risk and start working and managing their own risk. One of the measures that's very often taken is also that your suppliers should also fill in an SAQ, which you will probably know because that's also what your customers in the EU will demand of you. A self-assessment questionnaire, which will ask questions about your risk exposure and also about the way that you manage these risks. Let me stop here because I can go on explaining about management systems that need to be set up. I believe the important message of this is that if you go through this process, which might seem quite cumbersome at the moment and at first sight, because it requires a lot of changing in management system, and it requires you to look at things that maybe before you had looked at because they were not so relevant. That's cumbersome. It will take resources. It will take time. On the other side, it will keep you competitive. Because as I said in the beginning, these are requirements which are not going to go away. And the European directive is going to extend the scope of companies, of European companies that need to meet these criteria larger and larger. And if we're looking at the current trade and geopolitical situation, India has big chances of being a more important trading partner for the European Union. I'm sure there will be a lot of efforts in that direction. So being also on top of the requirements regarding human rights due diligence will certainly bring you and your company in a very good position to be an early starter with that and to have a very good competitive advantage over your competitors. So thank you very much so far, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Markus Learning. Thank you really, really much for all these insights, also for, in a very short amount of time, sharing already some very hands-on and practical advices, as well as sort of a checklist already, which is great and will be for sure of value to our participants. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so I will want to request everyone to use the question box in your user dashboard to put down some questions if you have. Thanks again, Markus Learning. We will resume after Indras Ghosh will have talked and represented IGCC also on this topic. For now, I would like to hand over now to our industry expert, Mr. Anurag Garg. Let me quickly introduce him. He is the Managing Director and the Country Head of India of Vitesco Technologies. He comes with over 32 years of experience in the industrial and also automotive business. He has been closely associated in developing the Pune plant here of Vitesco Technology from scratch, and therefore also developing the competence and the localization footprint with overseeing mechanical manufacturing for components and managing engineering teams for local and offshoring projects. It's been involved in various localization projects in India for fuel delivery modules, fuel pump and fuel rail assembly. At the moment, he's involved in setting up a greenfield at Pune and developing the localization footprint for Vitesco Technologies India as per the requirements of BS6 and components built up for local manufacturing to manage growing demand in the Indian market other than the business growth. So we are very happy to have here Mr. Anurag Garg sharing some practical insights on why do companies need industry-specific solutions for supply chain due diligence. Please, Mr. Anurag Garg, share your input with us.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and once again, thank you for having me over here. So the topic for the today is why do company needs industry specific solutions for supply chain due diligence. And if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the agenda what I'm really going to talk about, which basically covers, what is the due diligence in SCM, the many challenges what we face in supply chain, and how to ensure the due diligence, what are the best practices being followed, advantage, and of course, then I will be concluding what I'm going to talk about in during this time. So moving to the next slide, if I start talking about the due diligence, which is in the little word thorough checking, and thorough checking is not only checking the capacity and the structure of your supplier, but it is going to the last mile of the supply chain, taking into the consideration of the social and as well as the moral responsibilities, and which can be understood from this example over here. If you really look at here, the end user is the OEM, which is getting the battery pack from a supplier. Now, as long as the OEM is confirmed that the supplier is going to meet their requirement of the battery pack, he is quite comfortable. But in the entire supply chain, that is where the OEM really need to be focusing on how the battery pack supplier is really having, how is his supplier on the battery cell, or the battery cell who is supplying, how is he connected with the refinery, and refinery is with the mining. And then in the overall process, like Marcus also talked about, whether the labor laws are being followed, because these are very critical. This can really stop your plant at any point of time. So not only that capacities and the structure or the financial strength, it is important from the labor laws as well. And then that is where the OEMs need to ensure that they have not only focus on the tier 1, they are really going to the last mile, which could be tier 2, tier 3, or whatever it is. And that can also be understood from the certain message which is given on the slide. All these stakeholders really need the accurate information about their all the supply chain, what they have in the process, and then which basically helps them to identifying and reporting risks, and also to mitigate those risks in the process, which basically the responsibility of the enterprise, that they are not just focusing on what is within their own proximity or within their own company, but they are really having a full control on the entire supply chain, which is really meeting the overall requirement. And then when I move to the next slide, basically when we really talk of the supply chain, there are the different challenges what we face in the supply chain. If you can move to the next slide, please. It's taking some time.
Yeah,
So
I see. We might have some technical fallback a little bit.
No problem.
So we will be. I was about to say, I'm sure our technical backstop will make sure that this will come up anytime soon. As we all are used to this virtual setups, sometimes the technique in the background can be a stumbling block. But now everything is back on track. Please, Mr. Garg, continue.
Thank you. So challenges not only in the SCM, even the challenges in the virtual work life, and then that is how it is. And then so we really need to understand what are the challenges what we really face in our day-to-day work. If you really look at many of the companies, they have a very fragmented supply chain, and most of the time they are really hardly aware of their more than tier 1, and then in the process they are really not able to avoid many of the times to mitigate the risk. Also very important, traceability of the flow of the goods. Many of the companies, they are so much in the focus in the supplies that are they really able to keep them, information about the production movement or etc. And then that is also going to be very serious concern. Tomorrow you get something from somewhere, and now this is not right product. How much you have really supplied? What is the total in the overall chain, which is not so good? And then how are you really going to take care of that? For the transparency of the supply chain actors, like I talked whatever is the last supplier in the chain, is he really able to give the transparency on the overall structure of his company, overall working of his company on all fronts, not only on the capacity, not only on the structure, but also on the social and the moral front. And also the accuracy of the risk information. Are they really sharing each information to the customer or the enterprise, so that they can really plan some right decisions, or they can really plan some mitigation in terms of avoiding those kind of the risks. And last but not the least is very important. Many of the times, to speed to the market, we really take the shortcuts and avoid some initial investment financing and incentivizing the things, which at a later time really comes into a big challenge, because the initial investment what we do is basically to safeguard our future, and then to save that, these kind of challenges most of the companies or the SCM face in the organization. So the due diligence in the SCM will help companies to minimize these risks or these challenges of being exposed to legal and reputational risks. If you go to the next slide, and here this is basically how do we ensure the due diligence in SCM. There are few steps which are mentioned over here on the right side as well as on the left side, and then these are more related to the business, like we are talking about if the business is properly legalized or not, if have we been able to define the term of the business, do we have enough references from the supplier, do we really have enough information about the company's directors, financial balance sheet, also have we really checked the products what they are really supplying already in the market, or the kind of services what they are giving, and then really assessing the proposal if it really can go. But this is one part of the business. At the same time, what we see on the right side is the legal process, acquisition, risk. I mean, these are the real important aspects of the activities which we really need to take care of during the due diligence, which basically helps in I mean, like I say, the effective due diligence allows to proceed with a proposed business partnership. I mean, once you have really identified all the risks, you have also the mitigation plan, or you have a plan B, or you have a strategy to manage those challenges. I mean, this is really good to go, and you can really avoid all kind of the risks when you are in the market selling your products to the customer or whatever business you are in. And if I move to the next slide, which will basically bring us to what kind of the best practices for the due diligence. And these are the basically defined in the 3 stages, where in the stage 1, we really do the assess. I mean, of course, define in the scope areas what we really want to achieve.
Hello, everyone. It seems that we have lost our panelist. Mr. Anurag Garg, can you hear me? Okay. Maybe we will give it a few seconds. Maybe he comes back immediately. That'd be good. In the meantime, I want to ask the patience of the audience that those things sometimes can happen. Yes, okay. I would then suggest already to take a question from the audience, maybe to I will just screen the questions quickly. Yes. Yeah, so why we not, in the meantime, why we not just trying to answer a question here, and even though we said QA at the end, I think that's I hear. Okay. Or maybe we just, yes. So Yes, okay. So let's just do something. Let's just go ahead. We will still keep the Q&As at the end, and we would like also to engage now with the audience. We would like to pose a question to the audience, which will come up now. Yes, maybe it will not. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So I would ask everyone, please, to just participate here in this little endeavor. What are the likely challenges of performing supply chain due diligence in India? Please select continuous monitoring with suppliers, different labor laws on state level in India, compliance of direct indirect suppliers, difficulty on tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers, continue is monitoring with suppliers. So please share your thoughts. It's possible to click more than one sentence here. So I see a few have already voted. Please interact with us. Still, I would ask, we'll keep it open for a few seconds still. Again, what are the likely challenges of performing supply chain due diligence in India? Please share your thoughts on this. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to close it. And I want to share also it now with every one of you. So with regards to the likely challenges, the majority said compliance of direct and indirect suppliers. And then both runner-up 2 and 3, continuous monitoring with suppliers and difficulty on tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. And then different labor laws on state level in India and continuous monitoring with suppliers. Thank you very much for this little interaction. And I would now like to hand over to our in-house expert on this topic, Indra Ghosh. He will present how companies in India can approach those challenges and improve their capacities to make their own organization future-proof when it comes to supply chain due diligence. Indras, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope I am audible to you. Welcome today. It's an honor to be here with all of our experts from Amphari, from learning, and of course our industry expert, Mr. Anurag Garg, who I think should be joining us shortly. So today we commemorate a very special day for our partnership here at Business and Human Rights. But before that, we want to show you a video that we have been very hard work on. This is about the importance of the robust supply chain due diligence in business. We do hope you enjoy it, and it should be playing right now.
This is Anita. She is the managing director of a big manufacturing hub in India. She is gaining clients from all over the globe and increasingly from Germany. With better relations and access to foreign markets, it looks like the company is poised for major growth in the coming years. Anita knows that scaling up is no mean task. She is managing long, complex supply chains, ensuring materials and resources are coming in on time, maintaining smooth manufacturing lines, focusing on quality control to meet international standards, and so much more. Her commitment to these details is the reason behind the success of her company. But as she has an eye on all these checks and balances, she must be careful not to forget about the suppliers and contractors that are fueling the growth of her company too. These vendors may be meeting business standards, but are they meeting human rights standards? Turns out, one of the company's suppliers was relying on underage and underpaid labor. The contractor was being dishonest with his workers and not giving them their fair wages.
Can we pull up the video
This
again?
situation ultimately led to unrest and strikes. Anita was taken completely by surprise. Her operations was left vulnerable as her supply chain was affected. The consequences of overlooking the responsibility of human rights violations in her supply chain were dire. From labor strikes to factory closure, termination of large contracts, large government fines, and loss of reputation from the community. Anita found herself hunting for new suppliers on tight timelines, justifying the position to stakeholders, and ultimately, her customers saw the unrest on the news, and slowly many of them started buying from her competitor. What could have been a thriving business has now collapsed. But this is not Anita's story. Thankfully, Anita had needed no convincing to implement the measures specified in the Act for Corporate Human Rights Due Diligence (HRDD) in the supply chains. Anita had ensured that her company's operations adhered to the following core elements of the Act: adoption of the Human Rights Policy Statement, establishment of human rights risk management, adoption of measures to address human rights risks, taking remedial actions for human rights violations, setting up internal complaints procedure, implementing due diligence at indirect suppliers, documenting and reporting on due diligence. This is Anita. She is the managing director of a big manufacturing hub in India. She is gaining clients from all over the globe and increasingly from Germany. With better relations and access to foreign markets, it looks like the company is poised for major growth in the coming years. Anita knows that scaling up is no mean task. She is managing long, complex supply chains, ensuring materials and resources are coming in on time, maintaining smooth manufacturing lines, focusing on quality control to meet international standards, and so much more. Her commitment to these details is the reason behind the success of her company. But as she has an eye on all these checks and balances, she must be careful not to forget about the suppliers and contractors that are fueling the growth of her company too. These vendors may be meeting business standards, but are they meeting human rights standards? Turns out, one of the company's suppliers was relying on underage and underpaid labor. The contractor was being dishonest with his workers and not giving them their fair wages. This situation ultimately led to unrest and strikes. Anita was taken completely by surprise. Her operations was left vulnerable as her supply chain was affected. The consequences of overlooking the responsibility of human rights violations in her supply chain were dire. From labor strikes to factory closure, termination of large contracts, large government fines, and loss of reputation from the community. Anita found herself hunting for new suppliers on tight timelines, justifying the position to stakeholders, and ultimately, her customers saw the unrest on the news, and slowly many of them started buying from her competitor. What could have been a thriving business has now collapsed. But this is not Anita's story. Thankfully, Anita had needed no convincing to implement the measures specified in the Act for Corporate Human Rights Due Diligence (HRDD) in the supply chains. Anita had ensured that her company's operations adhered to the following core elements of the Act: adoption of the Human Rights Policy Statement, establishment of human rights risk management, adoption of measures to address human rights risks, taking remedial actions for human rights violations, setting up internal complaints procedure, implementing due diligence at indirect suppliers, documenting and reporting on due diligence activities. This allowed Anita to preemptively identify, assess and remedy violations of human rights in her supply chain. It helped her keep bad factors out, protect good relations with the community, and safeguard her company. Our commitment to human rights must also grow and evolve as we do. It is important to recognize that focusing on HRDD will always bring about sustainable and long-lasting growth, not only to business, but also to the communities they serve. Growing with responsibility benefits everyone.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for the video, Indras. And I think now, before we start with your part, I would like to bring back Mr. Anurag Garg to finish his presentation and share his valuable insights with the audience. Mr. Anurag Garg, please continue. And great to have you back. Mr. Garg, you're not audible at the moment. Maybe you have to.
Hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes.
Thank you. So thank you. And see, this is what the problem of virtual life. I mean, and I come from the old school of thoughts where I personally feel that the physical is always better than virtual, maybe, but for the time. Indras, if you can move to the next slide. I think we still.
Mr. Garg?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, you're here, no? I think it seems like the presentation is not working.
Right.
I'm sure Indras is working on it.
I can do one thing. Maybe I can read it from my side. Maybe that's okay.
Sure, please go ahead, and we will. In the meantime, we will solve the problem.
No problem. So basically, what I wanted to talk about is that what are the advantages of the due diligence, and we saw that in the video as well. And then basically, it helps in wherein we really get the access to the verifiable data. I mean, not only that, what the one or tier one is doing, we really have across the chain full information. We have a transparency and trust now, because once we have all those informations, we can really plan our mitigation or the risk plan. We can really create that. We can identify potential risks for sure, and then this can help companies what is going on and address any issue if wherever it is being found. And last but not the least, I mean, the effective SCM enables companies to arrest the bullwhip effect, to avoid the underproduction or many of the times even the overproduction. So basically, the due diligence, it helps in improving the product flow through accurate demand and sales forecasting, and also improve inventory management. Just to conclude, I think the advantage of the due diligence are really many, and I think it is must and then should not be avoided. And the kind of conclusion which I really would like to remark over here, it is really near real-time updates of supply chain information which we really get through this, allowing better control and visibility in localizing risk hotspots, performing risk mitigation. We have really talked about this quite a number of times. Access to the genuine information mean improved access to the verifiable inputs and the outputs. Nowadays, there is a buzzword of the blockchain, which can really enable a dynamic and effective due diligence process. So just to conclude, due diligence is an important activity for any organization which is really into the business to ensure the seamless operations at any point of time, anywhere in the world. Thank you. Once again, thank you for having me over here.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Anurag Garg, for this valuable insights from a very corporate perspective. Also, we are very happy that at the end you could share some of the benefits on implementing and adhering to human rights supply chain due diligence. I'm sure there might be some questions in the end also with regards to the benefits. Since we are a bit short in time now, I would just hand over quickly the word to Indras Ghosh, like I said, our expert in this topic, to just inform also the audience on what IGCC is doing and how they can approach all those challenges that Mr. Löning and Mr. Gag have discussed about.
Thank you, Johannes. I hope I am audible enough.
Yes, please continue.
Yes. Hello. So yeah, thank you again for the introduction, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone in India and also in Europe. I'm Indras Ghosh, and I'm currently in the sustainability chapter at the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. And here we are with the official launching of our human rights due diligence training. I thought perhaps foolishly I would start with an overview of the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, but I think our experts, Mr. Löning and the opening remarks from our guests have already covered that. I'm just going to breeze through it, where essentially according to the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, companies are obligated to make an effort, adequate effort, to ensure that human rights protection and environmental protections are protected in the supply chain. And this would require them to have adequate measures set out in the law that are appropriate for the individual context of the company. What that means is there is no predetermined solution for human rights due diligence or supply chain due diligence in that matter, and you need to take a look at what are your company and what you do to be able to answer that question. Briefly, here I wanted to convey what are the act going to be enforced on 1st January 2023. Of course, for companies with at least 3,000 employees. It will be expanded the year after that in 2024 to include companies with at least 1,000 companies. It would cover manufacturers, service providers, and financial services. The company type you can see here would include German companies in Germany, for branch offices of foreign companies in Germany. As long as you are coming under that company threshold, you will be directly impacted by the act. In terms of the calculation of employees, we need to understand that the group employees are included in that calculation, and employees would include also temporary workers with a tenure of 6 months or more. So I think Mr. Löning has beautifully summarized what needs to be done, and essentially it needs to just to visualize it, it is on 3 parts. Yeah, from your company's operation, you need to have a policy commitment, which include human rights statement, and then from the direct suppliers and in your own operations, you need to know what are your risks in terms of human rights risks as well as environmental risks, and this revolves around the implementation of essentially 4 steps, which is measure, identification, I beg your pardon, assessment, measures to address human rights violation, remedial actions, and grievance mechanisms. The same 4 steps are applicable on the indirect suppliers as per the Act, and you may be required to perform this on indirect suppliers level if you found substantiated knowledge of human rights violations in your supply chain. On the second level, there will be an indirect impact as a result of this. Direct suppliers and sub-suppliers located outside Germany, which do not meet the employee threshold, will be impacted, may be impacted, and due diligence obligation of the Act may be shared or extended to them. So we have discussed about what needs to be done, what needs to be incorporated for companies in India and Germany. So how can you prepare? With that, we were proud to launch our hybrid training on supply chain due diligence manager. This training is focusing on the German supply chain due diligence, and this is for the automotive supply chain. Why is it for the automotive supply chain? So what we understand today is that there is a need for industry-specific solutions, and this training that we are rolling out is developed by companies and for companies. The theme of today seems to be collaborative partnership, and this is why who will be in a better position than companies themselves who have centuries perhaps of knowledge of the supply chain. So we asked them through a series of roundtable, what are the challenges, what are your requirements, and with these companies we have collaboratively designed the training, and to make sure that it is relevant, we also need to keep in mind the complexity of the Indian market. And address specific challenges and scenario in the supply chain due diligence, in the sector. This would include, for example, a mapping and making sure that the monitoring exists in tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, which may be located far away from your base of production. And here, we are focusing rather not on the legal requirement, but rather on the practical knowledge to support the regulatory requirement. So we are also very proud to keep our partnership with two of our closest partners on this topic. The first one is Amphory, and of course, Mr. Learning. And again, through collaborative partnership, we developed this training where we work with Amphory, partner with Amphory to develop the virtual module contents. We also work with them, including Mr. Learning, on the inputs, advisory, and the workshop. We'll get into that in a little bit. And this collaborative approach and partnership is I think very, very important to make sure that all the trainings that we do, all the activities that we do are harmonized and standardized, keeping in mind that they may be slightly different standards and requirements across different regions. However, they are essentially anchored within the same framework, which is the United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights. So what do IGCC do in this training? So we are bringing the best of IGCC, where we are sustained markets. We also give our inputs on the technical content and incorporate, most importantly, the company's need and their inputs during our discussion. We dissect the German Supply Chain Act requirements. We also give our input on case study examples and exercises, and ensure alignment with the German, Indian, and international standard. Along with that, another department within IGCC called Dual Pro is basically our training expert inside IGCC, making sure that whatever technical contents we come up with fit into the German standard, for example, supporting in curriculum design, advisory on methodology, didactics, and also testing procedure. Why is this training unique? This hybrid training is unique because essentially it circles around learning for doing. We take a lot of great pain to understand what are the learning objectives here, understanding the obligations rising from the German supply chain, and establishing essentially an ecosystem to fulfill those requirements, so that companies who are enrolled in this training able to take it forward and adapt it to their own scenario and realities. Application based, where I mentioned before, it is driven by example case studies and hands-on assignment and project work. We'll also be You will also be benefiting from experts from Amfori, IGCC, and learning human rights. And this is where also you get a lot of hands-on exposure on how to perform supply chain due diligence. We also incorporate multi-method delivery through instruction-led web sessions and hands-on workshop and practice-oriented and self-learning material. And most importantly, it is industry-verified learning outcome, where through the dual testing procedure, your project submission at the end of the training will be evaluated through an independent evaluation panel. So we thought we'd give you a taste of this hybrid training. So this is how we envision it. If you look at the learning objective as a pyramid, at the bottom, of course, you have the first 4 modules, which is going to be virtual. And this covers the German supply chain law itself, followed by how do you get your organization ready for supply chain due diligence. So I think that's very important. The third module has to do with identifying and assessing human rights and environmental risks. And then the last virtual module will be for rather addressing and identifying identified risks within your supply chain and within your business operation. This will be followed by a physical 1-day study workshop that will be delivered by our expert partners in Amfori, and of course Mr. Learning is going to be there as well. So this is a very exciting workshop, and we think that it's going to give a lot of value for companies who are enrolled in this training. And lastly, in module 6, you will be we will be providing you with final assessment, presentation, and viva to make sure that whatever learnings you have absorbed will be adaptable to your company, and also we can evaluate on your learning progress as well. Thank you for the opportunity to present this. That's all from my end. Please, if you have any questions, do put it in the question box and we're happy to answer it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Indras, for giving insights on how IGCC comes up with a solution for our members to increase their own capacity in-house. I'm looking at the time now. We are a little bit, due to technical issues, also a little bit late on everything. Therefore, let's just jump right into the QA before we will go to the experts on the industry experts, and also will address something to Mr. Learning. I would like to just, with this given time constraints that we have, use one question to be posed to Stefan and Linda at the same time. I hope that's okay. If you're still here, I would like, thank you. Stefan is also still there, very good. So please, how do you, Stefan and Linda, see the supply chain due diligence in terms of strengthening India, Europe, and Indo-German trade? Maybe ladies first.
That's okay. Thank you for that. Let me first start with, I think, complimenting for the webinar. I think it's great, it's hand-on, the training looks great, and I think it would be really beneficial for any company to attend that training. And I also would like to thank for this quick video, and it's great to see a woman entrepreneur being featured in that video. Just wanted to make that comment, say thank you for that. I think, how is it going to strengthen a relationship? Well, I think the fact that we're sitting here together, I think that's one element. It's a business opportunity, and I think a business opportunity should be a win-win for both, for Germany in this specific case and for India. So I would say India grab those opportunities, but also Germany help them, and I think that's what we're doing here, to adapt to the new reality. And 2 remarks here from my side. There's a lot spoken about impact and risk, but let's not forget it's about impact to people first and foremost. And if we do that right as business, we as businesses all will thrive. And we need to do that via a good and strong process. And yes, we're using now the German Due Diligence Act to start working on that process. But that's not where it ends. There's more to come. So if you set yourself up for success in India, you also set up yourself for success for outside of India towards the globe. And that's not only Europe and that's not only Germany, because we know there's more legislation coming here. There is one thing I want to say here, which I think we should underline here, say from a company responsibility. It all starts with the tone at the top. That's relevant and important. There's also obligations and liability towards that, and make sure that the responsibility trickles down in a correct manner. But also speak about it. So I think it's also an opportunity to strengthen those relationships and strengthen trade by the Indian community and the Indian business to speak about those topics and start engaging on it in multiple fora here. Maybe just one last remark here before I hand over to Stefan, who is to the left in how I view him here. It's also not only about entire supply chain. We will have to look broader. I think that also has been addressed. And in doing so, we move into the entire value chain. And I think each and every company has the responsibility not only to help themselves, but also to help others, because that is ultimately to the benefit of all of us. And it has been proven that that sets up business for success, makes them more profitable, also moving forward. And I think that's also what the question you're coming from, what does it do for Indian and for German business here? Ultimately, business is also in there to be sustainable, and to be sustainable, there needs to be, say, a good and healthy, balance and income and cost. Last, I think here is that in doing that, the collaboration is key. But also, let's not invent the wheel when some wheels are already being invented. And I think leverage what is already out there, whether that's specific, schemes within automotive, whether that's more general schemes that address those topics by having a general code of conduct and auditing and systems already in place. Use that and don't start from scratch. Stefan, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Linda. And I would like to join you actually in thanking Markus and also Anurag for this great presentations and giving us much more insights on what the actual or for what the act will mean and the impacts on the companies, but also at the same time providing information as to get prepared for it. So I think that was very, very helpful. Thank you for that. Now, with respect to the Indo-German collaboration and business collaboration and what kind of effect the Act will have, of course, it's difficult to say because, as Linda pointed out, this is not a law that is specifically valid for the Indo-German corridor. It basically includes all countries in Europe and all countries or businesses from all countries that wish to continue doing business with Europe or European customers, European clients. But I would take it into a slightly different direction as well. I mean, this supply chain law or the EU directive, it's basically, it cannot be seen by itself or isolated. I mean, there's a huge societal pressure and I would say trend towards sustainable consumption, and I think this is what it comes back to. So we should not focus on necessarily what are the what does the Act provide for in terms of every single sentence and character. It's really more the general effect of how can we make consumption more sustainable, and how can we inform consumers in Europe about it, and how can we make sure that they can do an informed purchasing choice when it comes to it. And I think this is what it should be about. And I think whenever two countries, or in this two markets, work together and define similar standards or identical standards ideally for the companies, then this will be for the benefit of the businesses, because that will reduce the efforts to fulfill those standards. Because if India and Germany and Europe come closer together and apply the same standards, then in terms of certification, in terms of obligations, there's only one standard to fulfill, and that makes the companies more competitive. It makes the product more attractive, and I think this combination provides the biggest potential for companies in the Indo-German corridor in both ways. And I think this is something that we should also put on the agenda, hopefully, of the Indo-German government consultations. But of course, even beyond that, as we all know, since about 11 months now, we are waiting for the start of the trade agreement discussions between Europe and India, and that should be part of it. Standardization in order to make it easier for the companies to fulfill standards on either side, and that will help, and that will have a positive impact for the consumers as well as the companies. That's how I would see it at this moment.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda and Stefan. Tim has already left, so I would just try to scroll through the questions that have come up from the audience. We might do it the other way around now, as Markus Learning has started. So we will, is Mr. Anurag Garg still here? I can't see his face. Maybe he will come back. At least he's not audible. Okay, then let's address a question to Mr. Markus Learning. So one of the audience has asked, hi, Herr Learning, how do you see Lieferkettengesetz helping organizations with their ESG objectives? Any thoughts on this? Thanks. Would you be willing to just share a few thoughts on this for 2 minutes? So again, how do you see Lieferkettengesetz helping organizations with their ESG objectives? So basically, I think what is meant here, how is ESG reporting connected to Lieferkettengesetz?
I think one of the good things about Lieferkettengesetz is that it's a law. It standardizes what is expected of companies. And that's a step forward, because one of the flaws of all of these national action plans, and unfortunately will also be probably true for the Indian National Action Plan, they are not binding law. So a lot of companies will say, well, it's nice, but I'm not going to look at that. So binding law is helpful because it standardizes the approach. And regarding ESG, if you look at ESG performance of companies, it also means they all need to meet standards, especially in the S and in the G part of the ESG assessments, because they need to introduce a human rights due diligence, which will identify their risk, manage their risk, and we will see. And that's still in the making, how good tools will be able to assess the performance. Because that's one of the big flaws of all these ESG ratings at the moment, that you can, to some extent, of course, assess ecological, environmental performance of companies, but social and governance performances, it's nearly impossible. I mean, you have a lot of rating agencies out there that say they can rate it. I have some serious doubts about that. They rate whether there's something in the sustainability report and so on, which is okay. It's better than nothing. But to really assess the management maturity of a company, to be able to manage human rights risks, that's not something you do from a sustainability report. And even more complicated, it's getting even more complicated if you want to assess the real impact companies may have in their supply chains regarding, for example, overtime, child labor, forced labor, or other of these critical issues. So I would say this is the beginning of a process. Companies start working on it. Companies start also developing tools to measure what they're doing. And that, at the end of the day, is going to give more input into the whole ESG debate. And it will also be helpful if we have the European Directive on Reporting, which will also standardize things. Not this helpful.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. To address this question, there's also another one which I want to ask Mr. Learning as well. So for next year, we expect that only large companies will be affected, right? And then 24, this will be going down to companies of having 1,000 employees in the group itself. So, but beyond that, maybe, because obviously most of the companies are SMEs. So how do you see the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act also will impacting all the small ones? Is there something that some thoughts that you have on this, or what you foresee?
The German law and similarly also the European law, they have two flaws. For reasons of political compromise, they have this funny threshold, that companies with less than 1,000 employees have no human rights risks for some reason, which obviously makes no sense. The same is true that there is this tendency to only look, or let's say the law says, well, you should first look at your first tier supplier, and unless you know otherwise, unless you hear about this, that's good enough. I think both are misleading. It's not about the size of a company. It's also not about the first tier supplier, but it's about the risk. You can be a big company with a low human rights risk, and you can be a very small company with quite a high risk. Just imagine, let's say, a small trading company that is actually trading with mica or with some other commodity which is highly related to forced labor or to child labor or something like. So I would not be misled by these thresholds. You always should look at what is my company's risk regarding human rights, and then act accordingly. And also, if you're part of a supply chain, if your client is Daimler or I don't know, one of the big guys, and they're not interested whether you have 500, 300 or 3,000 employees. They want to know the risks that you pose to them. So just ignore these provisions. Look at your risk, find out of your risk, and act according to your size and to your possibilities.
Thanks, Markus. Yeah, I think this is something also the other panelists will share on. So I want to open this question also maybe to Linda or Stefan, if you would like to answer. I would like to comment on it, maybe, because Linda, I saw that you kind of you want to say something, so that's why maybe just go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I echo what was said by Markus. I think it applies to everyone, and it's a matter of time when this will be put, say, into hard law. And it also not applies to supply chain, it applies to the entire value chain. So ultimately, for any business has to make sure that it takes its own responsibility to respect human rights. And if you do that appropriately, and there is support, and there is help, and there's programs and education to helping you to put that in place, whether you're big or small, that will set you up ultimately for success and to make sure that you stay into business. Because ultimately, everyone is going to ask anyone where he or she works with, to comply and show, say, the impact and the risk. So I fully agree. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're big and small. Everyone should start addressing it, and rather now than later, because time is ticking.
Yes, well said. Stefan, do you want to add something? If not, we can just go ahead. Please, then feel free to do it.
No, I can keep it very, very short. I agree to everything that has been said. Unfortunately, I have to step out now for the next meeting. So this is why I have to apologize. It was great seeing you all. Markus, looking forward to seeing you in Mumbai soon. And Linda, hopefully as well. You said that you mentioned before that you might be coming. So looking forward to seeing all of you and looking forward to a close collaboration on the topic. And apologies again for stepping out. Have a good rest of the event.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Stefan, sharing your thoughts on this and spending some time with us here. Actually, we're already over the time. However, giving our little technical backlashes here, I would just continue for a few minutes only. I want to ask one really essential question from my point of view also. So also, Markus, you have been presenting about some sort of a checklist, no? Going down some steps, what you do first, what you do second, and all that. And I would like to understand, and maybe you can share it with the audience. Of course, there's a law, we follow the law, and then you said the most practical approach is just go from through the paragraphs, basically, and trying to work on this list, so to say. But maybe on a more abstract level, so is there like a critical success factor in that sense? Because the topic seems so complicated to approach. There's so many pitfalls, there's so many, it's so difficult altogether, and I think this is what everyone feels like. So what is something that you would advise everyone across industries to do as a critical classic success factor?
We'll take a common sense approach, as you should always do. It's like, you know, what's important, what's less important. And just imagine a situation that your 14-year-old daughter is asking you, so Daddy, what's important about that? How would you explain it? And obviously, as it is about protection of human rights, I mean, it's all about identifying the problems. So where is there a problem and what can I do about this problem? That's the core of all of these laws. And so that's where I would always, you know, put my focus on. And, you know, yes, you need to have a policy and all of that, but, you know, don't overspend time on that. You can always change policies next year, you know, when you learn something. Or so focus on risk identification, understand your business, understand your supply chains, see whether you need to, you know, maybe rearrange supply chains, reduce the numbers of suppliers, or whatever the appropriate measure is. You need to probably do some thinking about that and some work with suppliers. So I would consider that the core of it all. Everything else groups around that.
Yes. So try to identify the problems and work closely with your supplier. Linda, you want to add on to that, maybe also from your experiences, but probably your member companies have shared with you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Marcus, just to add here, and in identifying the risk, we can do very complicated things, but let's start talking with the stakeholders and rights holders, because they can very easily tell a company what their biggest risks are. And I mention here specifically stakeholders and rights holders, because sometimes that's what we tend to forget, that is to include the voice of workers and communities in that assessment. So let's not overcomplicate it, just start engaging and listen. And I think that's what brings you, you know, very easily to the core of it.
Thank you so much, Linda. That is perfectly, this would have been a perfect last closing sentence on this topic. Before we close the session, I would like to thank obviously all of you, also the speakers who have already left, Stefan and Tim, also from the embassy, Marcus Learning, thank you so much, Linda, thank you so much, and Mr. Gag, he has not come back, unfortunately, he might have some technical problems, so also still thank you to you, Mr. Gag, maybe you're listening in. I would like to pick up one little question before we close here. One person has asked, will there be any training for chemical companies? So as we just heard, and this was also for me in between the lines here, we need industry specific solutions. We need a common understanding of the topic, a common approach on it, as just Mr. Marcus Learning has described it, but we also need, if it goes down into a deep dive, industry specific solution. And yes, IGCC is planning on more trainings and more events on this topic. We will continue to guide and support the Indo-German business and sustainability community on this. Far and foremost, now we have offered this training, which is a funded initiative where we closely work together with both of you, Linda Kromyong from Amphori, and also Marcus Learning. And we are happy to receive also interest. So feel free to reach out to us on this topic, on this training. And yeah, with that, if Indras wants to share something, then he can do this now. If not, then I would like to conclude this session.
Yeah, thank you, Hannes. Thank you all to everyone that I'll give the last words. Yeah, so we also have training for human rights due diligence on the construction and real estate. Those of you who are working or operating in that sector, do go to our website and check it out. And yeah, so we do realize there is a lot of industry need in terms of sector specific training. But if you have any specific interest, do come with us. The training that we are unveiling for the automotive sector is currently funded for the first batch. And therefore, I would like to encourage all of you to take a look at our website for further training on different sectors. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Yes. Thank you. Goodbye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.